Look at her, folks. Look what I almost married. Charles Whitman's voice carried across the church courtyard like a whip crack, and every head turned toward the woman in white standing frozen at the altar steps. He grabbed her wrist, yanking her gloved hand high above her head so the entire congregation could see. "Fire scars," he announced with theatrical disgust. "From her fingers to her elbow, ugly as sin, and she thought she could hide them from me with lace and promises." Evangeline Hartwell felt the blood drain from her face as 200 pairs of eyes fixed on her exposed arm. The scars were old, 10 years since the cabin fire that killed her parents, but they still twisted across her skin like angry red rivers. She'd worn long gloves to hide them, just as she always did, but Charles had ripped them away the moment Reverend Mills asked if there were any objections to the union. "Damaged goods," Charles continued, his handsome face twisted with contempt. "That's what my father warned me about, taking charity cases. Should have listened." The congregation murmured like a disturbed hive. Evangeline saw Mrs. Patterson cover her mouth in shock, saw young Billy Morrison point and whisper to his sister. Heat crawled up her neck as shame and rage warred in her chest. She'd known Charles was marrying her for her late father's land, just as she was marrying him for security, but she'd never expected cruelty. In their brief courtship, he'd been nothing but gentlemanlike, even when she'd kept her gloves on during their chaperoned visits. "Charles, please," she whispered. "Please what? Please pretend you're not deformed." He shoved her arm away like it burned him. "I wouldn't bet a scarred-up cripple if you were the last woman in Colorado territory." The words hit like physical blows. Evangeline stumbled backward, her wedding dress catching on the church steps. Around the courtyard she saw pity in some faces, disgust in others, but worst of all, relief that it wasn't happening to them. She gathered her skirts, preparing to run, when the metallic click of a rifle being cocked cut through the autumn air. "Mister, you best watch your tongue." The voice was low, deadly calm, and came from somewhere behind the crowd. Every head swiveled toward the sound, and Evangeline saw a tall figure emerge from the shadows of the oak trees, a stranger in worn leather and dusty boots, with a rifle trained steady on Charles Whitman's chest. Asterisk. The stranger stepped into the dappled sunlight, and Evangeline caught her breath. He was lean as a whip, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes the color of winter sky. Everything about him spoke of the frontier, from his weathered hat to the easy way he held that Winchester, like it was part of his arm. "Apologize to the lady," he said, never taking his eyes off Charles. Charles puffed up like an angry rooster. "Who the hell are you? This is a private matter, making it public when you humiliated her in front of half the territory." The stranger's voice dropped another degree. "Name's Jake Morrison, and right now I'm the man deciding whether you leave here walking or in a pine box." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Evangeline felt caught between two forces, the cruel man who'd just shattered her last hope of security, and this dangerous stranger who'd appeared like something out of a dime novel. Part of her wanted to tell Jake Morrison to lower his rifle, to handle this with dignity, but a larger part, the part that had endured 10 years of pitying looks and whispered comments, wanted to see Charles Whitman brought low. "You can't threaten me," Charles sputtered, but his face had gone pale. "My father owns half this county. Sheriff Hawkins is practically family. Your father ain't here." Jake cut him off. "And neither is Hawkins." Mrs. Patterson clutched her husband's arm. "Someone should fetch the sheriff," she whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. Evangeline's heart hammered as she realized the choice before her. She could thank this stranger and walk away, preserving what little dignity remained, or she could let him force the apology that Charles would never give willingly, and make herself complicit in whatever came next. "Ma'am," Jake's eyes found hers steady and unreadable. "Your call. Say the word, and I'll lower this rifle. But if you want justice for what he just did to you, now's your chance." The church bell chose that moment to chime the hour, its bronze voice rolling across the courtyard like a funeral toll. In the distance, Evangeline could hear the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. Sheriff Hawkins and his deputies, riding hard toward the church. Charles heard them too, and his cruel smile returned. "Hear that, stranger? You just made the biggest mistake of your life." The hoofbeats grew louder, dust clouds rising like smoke signals against the autumn sky. Sheriff Hawkins materialized first through the haze, a thick-set man with a silver star that caught the light like a target. Behind him rode 3 deputies, their hands already resting on their gun butts. Jake's rifle never wavered, but Evangeline saw the slight tightening around his eyes. 4 lawmen against 1 stranger. The mathematics were brutally simple. What's the trouble here? Hawkins dismounted with the casual authority of a man who'd never been told no. His gaze swept the scene, the abandoned bride, the furious groom, the armed stranger, and his expression hardened. Jake Morrison should have known. The way he said the name made Evangeline's stomach drop. These men knew each other, and there was history in that knowledge. "Sheriff." Jake nodded, his voice carefully neutral. "Just having a conversation about manners. Manners don't require firearms." Hawkins stepped closer, his hand hovering near his Colt. "Lower that rifle, boy. You're disturbing a wedding." "Wedding's over," Jake replied. "Man here made that clear when he decided to abuse his bride in front of God and everybody." Charles stepped forward, righteous indignation flooding his voice. "He threatened to kill me, Sheriff. In front of witnesses, I demand you arrest him for assault and disturbing the peace." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Evangeline realized with growing horror that the narrative was shifting. Jake was becoming the villain of this story, the violent drifter who disrupted a respectable ceremony. Her humiliation was already fading into background noise. "That true, Morrison?" Hawkins asked. "You threatened Mr. Whitman." "I suggested he apologize to the lady for his ungentlemanly behavior." With a rifle pointed at his chest, Charles added quickly, "Sheriff, this man is clearly unstable. For the safety of everyone here, put down the weapon," Hawkins commanded, his own gun sliding from its holster. "Now." The 3 deputies fanned out in a practiced formation, boxing Jake in from 3 sides. Evangeline could see the trap closing, could see how this would end. Jake would be arrested, possibly killed if he resisted. Charles would walk away the injured party, his reputation intact, and she would remain what she'd always been, damaged goods, now with the added shame of being abandoned at the altar. "Don't do this, Sheriff," Jake said quietly. "You know what's right here." Hawkins' smile was as cold as Winter Creek water. "What's right is keeping the peace, and you're disturbing it." The rifle barrel began to lower, and Evangeline realized she was about to lose the only person who'd ever stood up for her. 4***. "Stop." Evangeline's voice cut through the tension like a church bell at midnight. Every eye turned to her as she stepped down from the altar, her wedding dress trailing in the dust. Her hands shook, but her voice grew stronger. "You want to arrest someone, Sheriff?" "Arrest me?" Hawkins blinked. "Ma'am, I asked Mr. Morrison to defend me." The lie came smooth as silk, but her heart hammered against her ribs. "When Charles humiliated me in front of everyone, I begged this man to help. If he's guilty of anything, it's being too much of a gentleman to refuse a lady in distress." Charles' face went purple. "That's not she's lying. Am I?" Evangeline turned to face the congregation, pulling off her remaining glove with deliberate slowness. The scars caught the afternoon light, but for the first time in 10 years she didn't flinch. "Everyone here saw what happened. Charles Whitman dragged me up these steps, exposed my scars, and called me damaged goods, in front of children, in front of God." Mrs. Patterson looked away, shame coloring her cheeks. Several other women shifted uncomfortably, perhaps remembering their own moments of cruel exposure. "That what you saw too, Sheriff?" Jake asked quietly, his rifle still pointed groundward. Hawkins looked around the crowd, reading the changing mood. The righteous anger was cooling, replaced by something more uncomfortable. "Charles, that true? You say those things. She was trying to deceive me. A man has a right to know what he's getting into. A man has a right to be decent," came a voice from the crowd. Old Mr. Garrett, the blacksmith, stepped forward. "I got a daughter with a withered arm. Anyone talk to her like that, I'd horsewhip them myself. Several men nodded agreement. The tide was turning. Jake caught Evangeline's eye across the courtyard, and something passed between them, understanding perhaps, or recognition, two broken people who'd found courage in an unlikely moment. "Sheriff," Jake said, sliding his rifle into its saddle scabbard, "seems like the only crime here was poor manners. And last I checked, that ain't against the law." Hawkins holstered his gun, clearly calculating. The Whitman family had money and influence, but public opinion was a powerful force in a small territory. "Weddings called off," he announced. "Everyone go home." But as the crowd began to disperse, Charles Whitman stepped close to Evangeline, his voice a venomous whisper. "You think you've won something here. You're still scarred, still alone, and now you're poor too. That stranger won't stay forever." She felt Jake's presence behind her like a warm shadow. 3 months later, Evangeline stood behind the counter of Morrison's general store, tallying the day's receipts by lamplight. Through the window she could see Jake splitting wood in the fading dusk, his movements efficient and sure. He'd bought the abandoned storefront with money saved from years of range work, and asked her to run it with a partnership that was as much about respect as it was business. The bell above the door chimed, and Mrs. Patterson entered with her daughter. The older woman's eyes went to Evangeline's uncovered hands. She'd stopped wearing gloves weeks ago, but instead of pity, there was something like admiration in her gaze. "Heard you're teaching young Alice her letters," Mrs. Patterson said, counting out coins for flour and sugar. "She's a quick learner." Evangeline wrapped the purchases carefully. "Reminds me of myself at that age. My Alice says you're the best teacher she's ever had. Says you understand what it's like to be different." After they left, Jake came inside, shaking sawdust from his hair. "Charles Whitman rode through town today," he said quietly. Evangeline's hand stilled on the ledger, and tipped his hat and kept riding. "Word is his father cut him off after what happened at the church. He's working cattle down in New Mexico now." She felt no satisfaction in Charles' downfall, only a distant sense of justice served. "What about Sheriff Hawkins?" Jake's smile was grim. "Been asking questions about me. Found out I used to be a deputy marshal before." He gestured vaguely. "Before I decided law and justice weren't always the same thing." "Is that why you helped me?" "Professional habit." "No." Jake moved closer, his winter blue eyes serious. "I helped you because I know what it's like to be marked by something you can't change. Mine just don't show on the outside." Evangeline looked at this man who'd appeared in her darkest moment like an answered prayer. "What happens now?" "Now we keep building something good." Jake's calloused fingers traced the scars on her hand with infinite gentleness. "If you're willing." Outside, the first stars appeared over the Colorado territory, and somewhere in the distance, a nightbird called to its mate, wild and free and unashamed. Years later, when travelers asked about the couple who ran Morrison's general store, folks would tell them about the day a stranger with a rifle taught a whole town the difference between damaged and strong. But Jake and Evangeline never needed the telling. They lived it every day, scars and all, in the life they'd built from the ashes of someone else's cruelty. The lamplight flickered against the window, warm as a promise, steady as love.